Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. Some of the stuff I'm talking about is metal tonight. Turns out some of it actually isn't. Yeah, we'll get into that here. So, stop by a local record store sometime last week, and yeah, they've been getting in a good amount of metal stuff. They've bought a lot, and so they're kind of digging through it, putting it out on the shelves. And as I was checking out, I noticed they had a couple of boxes of singles sitting up next to the cash register, which is unusual. They usually don't have singles prominently displayed up front because they usually don't have many, if any, singles in the store. Let's face it, it's not the most popular format these days. But, I could tell right away that, they had some like punk and hardcore singles and stuff in the box. So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, let me flip through these while you guys, ring those up. And I found a few interesting things. One in particular caught my eye because I'd been wondering what the record sounded like for almost 30 years. So, of course, it had to come home with me and check it out, and I discovered something I did not expect whatsoever. The record in question is this one. It's a 7-inch by a band from California called Burning Image. Pretty good name for a band. Cool black and white picture sleeve. Like the art on it a lot. It has two tracks on it, Burning Image Burning and Final Conflict. And this came out in 1984. Only 500 copies were pressed. So, yeah, what's my sort of weird history with this? I've known about this single since somewhere around 96 or 97. The reason I knew about it was that it was featured on the cover of a book about heavy metal records that came out around then. It's this one. It's called Heavy Metal The Vinyl Years. John Allenson was a collector and dealer. He had a mail order thing with where you could get a catalog full of old heavy metal vinyl. He also ran a record exchange, I think it was in Bluefield, West Virginia, for a while. Um, and yeah, he compiled this book on, heavy metal vinyl, basically. It's a very sort of bare bones book, but it's an interesting kind of early example of someone trying to pull together, a bigger list of what was available. Yeah, again, there's no info on bands whatsoever other than just like, here's the releases by them, a year of release, label, if it was colored vinyl or picture disc, stuff like that is noted. And of course, you can tell right away by the size of the book that it's very incomplete. There was a ton of stuff that wasn't featured in it. It's just the stuff, he knew about and had come across over his time collecting. He had collected new wave of British heavy metal back in the day and all that stuff. But yeah, and there are some pages of pictures too. Like I think each chapter has, some black and white pictures of different ones, just arranged alphabetically. And the cover features a lot of pretty prominent and well-known stuff. Metallica, Candlemass, there's an Angel Witch, Iron Maiden, um, Motorhead, etc. A Judas Priest. There's some extra new wave of British heavy metal sprinkled in because that was one of John's big things. So you get Desolation Angels, the Virtue single, which was not well known at all at the time. It's, a huge high dollar new wave of British heavy metal single now. Not so much back there in the mid to late 90s. Um, there was a couple here that, yeah, it's kind of like, what is that? For example, there's something here by a band called Avatar. Avatar is Savatage before they became Savatage. But the one that always kind of eluded me in terms of what the heck is that is this one down here, which, as we now know, is that Burning Image single. I mean, you could read it here, and it's included with an entry in here. All it really says is 1984, California, Burning Image, lists the songs, and lists it as a thrash slash power release. He has like, just a very brief, one or two word description of genre, power, new wave of British heavy metal, death, stuff like that. And so yeah, again, it's a neat looking picture sleeve and it's a cool name for a band. So it always kind of stuck in my head. It's like, huh, okay. Don't know anything about them. And I feel like I probably had typed the name in here and there. You type it into Metal Archives, you don't get a hit. So I'm like, okay. Metal Archives isn't complete. Maybe it's one of those bands that's kind of borderline metal that Metal Archives doesn't include. So I never really had found out anything about the band. I've never seen a copy of the single for sale before, but that image has been stuck in the back of my brain for close to 30 years now. All the other stuff on this cover, I eventually either picked up or at least heard. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else on there that's unknown to me. So this was kind of like the last one, and the one that I never had completely followed up on. And last week, I'm standing in the record store and it's sitting there in a box staring back at me. I'm like, well, hi there. You're coming home with me. Now, one thing I kind of picked up on right away. This was only listed as like, they had like a $10 price on it. I'm just like, okay, that's got to be a bootleg or something. I don't think they have an old 84 single for just 10 bucks. And a lot of the stuff in the boxes was stuff like that, things that were reissues or unofficial issues. A lot of cool stuff, and I'll show you some more of them in a few minutes. But like, okay, something's up, but for like, 10 bucks or so, I don't care if it's a bootleg or something. It's interesting to me. I've always been a little curious about it and never have gotten to hear it. So yes, whatever the heck it is, here's my $10. Just take my money. So yeah, when I got home and checked it out in more detail, turns out that it was actually reissued, and it's a legit reissue. It's not a boot. It was done on, wait for it, Going Underground Records in 2021. So about 4 years ago. I had no idea. Never heard of it coming out as a reissue or anything. They even re printed the little insert. It came originally with a yellow insert that's a little bit larger than the picture sleeve itself. I think the picture sleeve on the original is just kind of a fold around affair, whereas on the reissue, it's actually, glued together. But yeah, you get back sleeve here with again some kind of claw work. It's actually turned at an angle. So like this is the front. If you turn it, you got to rotate it this way to get a sense for it. But I also feel like the artwork there makes more sense if you turn it this way. So yeah, some orientation issues going on here. But again, everything looks fairly cool, fairly interesting. The band photos start to give something away though. When you're looking at the images, it's like, okay, these guys, not a very typical metal look. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but they don't quite look like a metal act. And it turns out they're not. And that's why they're not in Metal Archives. So yeah, that entry about them being a thrash power band, no, no, there is none of any of that in the music whatsoever. I'm going to play a clip over here. Let's see. I'm going to play a little bit of a clip from the track Burning Image Burning. This will be in the middle of the track. I think it's kind of the one of the cooler parts of either song. So yeah, let's give you a chance to hear this single. It took me, almost 30 years to dredge it up. You can do it on YouTube really easy, it turns out. I just never had. So yeah, let's check out a clip from Burning Image Burning, see what this band actually sounds like. So yeah, Turns out they have a lot more in common with like the California death rock scene from the early and mid 80s. Not really a heavy metal connection at all. When I pulled it up in Discogs, looks like the band, yeah, had, a few releases later on. I don't know if those are anthologies, collections, if they got back together, reunited in the 2000s and did some stuff. Don't really know. This is all new to me too. But yeah, it does kind of beg the question of, I mean, why did Allenson call it thrash power metal? I have no idea. That makes no sense at all. But why was it even in this book? It doesn't really cover any kind of, goth or death rock or post-punk stuff at all. It was pretty straightforward meat and potatoes heavy metal releases. So the fact that he's not only included in the book, but featured it on the cover tells me he liked it. All of these were kinds of, records and bands that were very much in his wheelhouse. So it's not like he didn't hear it or listen to it and just mislabeled the genre. He knew it, he liked it enough and featured it right there, but it doesn't fit in with the material from that book whatsoever. So yeah, kind of strange. Not a bad little single. Death rock's not a genre I'm well versed in. I've talked about it a little bit not too long ago. I reviewed the Phantoms book by um, Mikey Bean. And yeah, he actually left a really nice comment on that video. And I had just like, picked up this single. It's like, oh yeah, that's a cool band. I remember them. So yeah, it's really more part of that world than anything else. So yeah, almost 30 years later, I finally have at least some answers about what the thing sounds like and more information about the band. But it now just dredges up more questions of why the heck is it in that book and labeled in such a strange way? Don't know. A few other singles came out of that box as well. These aren't necessarily connected to one another much, but might as well put them together. Not often that I am able to buy singles in the wild. It's more like every now and then I get one through Discogs or, from different dealers. But they had some pretty cool stuff in the box. Saw this, for example. And I really was thinking at first it was going to be something by the Chilean band Pentagram, but checked it and saw that no, it's Living in a Ram's Head and backed with When the Screams Come. So this is essentially, I'm not sure if this one's an official reissue or a boot. I'm going to guess boot. Doesn't really matter. Of the band's kind of classic 1979 single, right? They even reproduced the label pretty similarly. This color scheme, the way it's laid out, is a lot like the original single. Um, and, here is the original single for comparison. It was on, high voltage instead of chained heat, but yeah, similar kind of layout, which I thought, is kind of a nice touch. I don't mind it when labels do these labels that are similar, but have, obvious differences. There's no way somebody's going to look at this and get it confused with the original single. That, again, is when you're getting into kind of, serious boot territory. But it is nice they kind of keep the same aesthetic for folks picking this up. There's a very short insert with this, with Bobby talking a little bit about the recording session for this single. It's an interesting period in Pentagram history. Most people, when they're talking about 70s era Pentagram, they're talking about the stuff more from like, 72, 73, 74, that particular lineup of the band. But Pentagram did kind of, dissolve and then reform with a very different lineup in the late 70s and release that one high voltage single. And it's an absolute banger. It's two of their really iconic songs, and they do indeed sound extremely heavy around this time period, more so than they did in the early 70s. A lot of the early 70s stuff is fantastic, but here you could tell they really were leaning into the heavier, doomier side of things and a kind of a more electrified sound as well. But it's also an era where there's not much material from the band. Most of the old demos and rehearsals and stuff that circulate are from the early to mid 70s. I've never come across a ton of stuff from this late 70s high voltage lineup. There's a live recording called Keg Full of Dynamite. There's one or two other live recordings from that era, I think. but they didn't seem to commit a lot of stuff to tape during that era compared to what they did earlier. And of course, compared to what they did in the 80s when they were reconfigured with the Death Row lineup. But yeah, if you've never heard this particular single by Pentagram, it's one of their best releases. Definitely worth checking out. The old original Pentagram vinyl has gotten ridiculously expensive. I mean, I remember, for the longest time through the 90s, early 2000s, this was a $50 record. I'd see it from time to time in auctions and on sale lists, and it was just always $50. I didn't even have to look at the price. I knew what they were going to ask for it, 50 bucks. I've had this copy for forever. I don't even remember when I got it. But you look and try to get it now, and it's probably going to run you a couple of $100. Last thing with this, you will sometimes see copies of this original single with a picture sleeve. I think it's like a light blue, has a picture of the band or something on the cover. It's a really kind of, straightforward sleeve. The picture sleeves are not original. This, when it was released in the late 70s, did not come with those picture sleeves. Those picture sleeves were created much later by somebody in the greater Baltimore, DC, Nova part of geography. And I guess they were added to some unsold copies or something like that. So it's a neat enough thing with the picture sleeve, but it was not an original. Those were printed up and added to copies much, much later. This copy has a very different picture sleeve. I'm not sure what's going on here. I guess it's supposed to be a ram in a cloak or something. I don't know. Not the best piece of artwork ever, but it is cool that they reissued the single for folks that want to check it out. Being a bit of a pentagram nut, yeah, I picked it up. Also picked up this, another band that I'm kind of nuts about, Misfits. Of course, this is just a bootleg. If this were an original copy, it'd be several $1,000s. Not lucky enough to find that sitting in a box next to the cash register at checkout. Yeah, this is just a later boot pressing. I haven't looked up details on it. It's plain white labels, red vinyl. It looks cool. It sounds cool. It's actually got cool featured on it. Cool and cool cough, of course. It's a neat artifact from the beginning of the Misfits. It sounds very different. It's got, the Glenn, Jerry, and Manny lineup. And it's the one where Glenn is playing, it's listed as electric synth piano, which I think they were sort of running it just like through a basic amp or something. As such, it has a really unique sound to it because it's drums, bass, and this electric synth thing. So it's got almost more of like a Doors kind of musical setup to it. Both tracks are good. They redid the track She later on, more like during the Static Age era. And so you can kind of hear that on those recordings where it sounds more like a typical Misfit song. But I do like the version on here with this, just very moody electric piano thing in the background. It works really well with Glenn's vocals. And the song Cough Cool is in that same vein. So yeah, I don't have any of the old original Misfits 7-inch stuff. Those have always been way too expensive and out of my price range. But never had picked up a boot of this particular one either, and was glad to throw it into the pile. The last one that came out of the singles bin is this. Now, this is a much newer thing. It's by a band called Stone Dagger. They made a two-song demo in 2013, and it circulated and did pretty well in underground realms. And so it did get a vinyl pressing. I think the vinyl copies came out in 2014. It's on Electric Assault Records. Real simple, kind of pink. I don't know if this is going to show up as red or pink on camera, but it's a very, very kind of, yeah, Easter time type pink color. It's unfortunately the only thing they ever released. The band featured some guys that have been in a lot of bands ever since then. Brendan Radigan is in the band. He, of course, worked with Magic Circle. He's featured on the Pagan Altar album that came out here in 2025. Um, there's another member who's done a lot of projects. His last name's Latour. I'm forgetting his first name. Joey. Give me a second. Got it pulled up over here on the side. Justin, sorry. Yeah, Justin Detour, not Latour, Detour. So yeah, Justin DeTore has worked with Magic Circle, Sumerlands, among other projects. And the third member's also been in a lot of projects. So th this wasn't just like some guys who did one thing and disappeared. They've actually been pretty active. Stone Dagger was out of Massachusetts. Both tracks on this are really, really solid. I was lucky enough to hear the demo about the time it came out. A collecting buddy of mine picked it up, went nuts for it, and shared it with some of us. And so like, damn, that is really good. So for years we were all kind of waiting for Stone Dagger to release something else. It's now been 12 years. I think it's safe to say Stone Dagger is not going to release anything else. But in case you never got to hear this project, I did dial up one of the tracks over here. So let's check out a little bit of The Siege of Jerusalem. And again, I've just jumped into the middle of the track here so you can kind of get an idea of what they're doing. Yeah, so pretty cool stuff. It's got a very doomy edge, but it's also a pretty powerful sound. It's not slow or overly boring. It always has, like a pretty good, punch to it at the same time. Both tracks are pretty good. They're both like a little over 5 minutes. So, for a single, you feel like you get your money's worth out of it. Again, the original copies were on cassettes in 2023. Then they did get it at least pressed up on vinyl. I'm glad they got it onto at least a format other than cassette. But it is a shame that they haven't circled back around to Stone Dagger and released like a full album because it's really cool material. Anyway, that is what I pulled out of a box of singles while checking out with a few other albums. But yeah, some pretty cool stuff there. Really glad to finally know a little bit more about Burning Image. Cheap Pentagram and Misfits bootlegs will always come home with me. And yeah, the Stone Dagger I had never picked up a physical copy of, so it was awesome to find that as well. Now let's talk metal in the comments down below. Any random bands or singles, albums that have been on your, oh, yeah, I've been not getting around to checking that out for, decades worth of time, like Burning Image in my case? If so, who is it that you've been meaning to check out? Will you pick up these kind of, cheap bootlegs when you see them, or do you pass on that kind of stuff? I understand if some folks aren't interested in them. Um, I'm never going to be able to afford an original copy of Cough Cool, so it's kind of a cool way for me to pick it up. But is it the kind of thing that appeals to you, or do you pass on those kind of items when you find them? Leave some comments down below. Let folks know your thoughts on stuff, and that's going to do it. So until next time, everybody take care, and as always, keep banging your head.